Welcome everybody to this edition of Probation Matters, which is a podcast by PBNI, which tells the stories of the work that probation does and the impact that we can make in terms of changing lives for safer communities. So absolutely delighted today to be joined by Kirsten McFarland, who's just been appointed as PBNI's Trauma and Resilience Implementation Coordinator, and Marian Molloy from the Safeguarding Board, who is the Trauma-Informed Practice Implementation Manager. So welcome to both of you today.
Thank you.
Delighted to have you. So maybe just to provide a bit of context and background, could you maybe, Kirsten, tell us a little bit about what does it mean to be a trauma-informed organisation?
I think it's a really important question, and I think it's really important that we all really think about what this means for us as we move towards that journey in probation to be trauma-informed. We run the risk sometimes of this when we're hearing so much about the word trauma-informed, of it becoming a bit of a buzzword and maybe even a wee bit of fatigue about it's all well and good that we say this term, but what does it actually mean? And what does that look like for us in practice as an organisation? For me, in that kind of summary, I suppose there's lots of different ways that we could kind of explain that. But the real basis of it for me is about how we can work in an environment, how people can access our services and those we support, that is a supportive, safe environment, that we're looking at how we can build resilience and how we can actually just all enjoy being in work and look after each other in work. That for me is in essence what we're trying to achieve here. But it is really about us having that realisation about the widespread impact of trauma and recognising what those signs and symptoms of trauma are, and knowing that that's then for us to kind of try to respond in the best way possible to that. We all have different experiences through life, and it's about being sensitive to how that might show up for people day to day, whether that's when we're supporting service users, whether that's when we engage with others and their partner external agencies, or whether that's just ourselves day and day with our colleagues and work as well. So it applies across the whole board. And
it's not a soft way of dealing with things. It's actually a difficult and hard way to approach.
Absolutely. I think it's maybe a bit of a misconception about being trauma-informed, that it is a soft approach. In fact, the way I look at it is we're actually really asking people to show that recognition and turn towards what is going on for people here, and how does this show up, and in that way it can be difficult, and actually and sometimes can be more challenging, and I think it takes a lot of bravery to put that recognition on and try to respond in the best way to make sure that we are looking after ourselves and others, but also providing a more effective service for everybody.
And Marian, Safeguarding Board have been leaders in this field, and they've been really supportive of organisations like Probation. So from your perspective, could you maybe just tell us a bit about Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland's perspective on what a trauma-informed organisation is, what that looks like, and what it feels like?
Very much so, Gail. I think that for me and for the team that I work in, the Trauma-Informed Practice team in the Safeguarding Board, our focus is that a trauma-informed organisation recognises the importance of relationships and connectedness, and that is at the heart of everything, and it's that idea that it's not a one-off, and it's not necessarily about what we do, and it's not even about how we do it. It's about who we are, who we are as the organisation and who we are as the individuals who make up the organisation, and how we embody the principles of a trauma-informed approach. If you focus on that and focus on how we know that trauma is relational, trauma happens within relationships and trauma can be healed within relationships, but that it is about the people, but it's also then about all the things that impact the people, like the policies, like the environment, like the language that we use. It's about all of it. So it's very much that broad spectrum approach in terms of realising the prevalence of it, which has been heightened for us now that we have Colin Walsh's and his colleagues' study that came out earlier this year, the prevalence of it for our own society and the things that have impacted our own society as well and our own unique history. So having that information now, really highlights just how we really need to think about that, the way that it impacts the people that work here and the people that you serve, and making sure that the organisation embodies the principles, really.
And those two areas, relationships and connectedness, are just so important to probation. And, even in terms of the service users we're working with, who so many of them present with addictions, and so many of them are presenting with mental health issues, and they don't have that connectivity, they don't have that ability to have other relationships in life. It's just such an, I mean, that really sums up to me those two words, what we're trying to do with a trauma-informed approach. It's really, really important. Just in terms of, Kirsten, the workplace, why is it important that we'll have this in the workplace in probation? Why we are taking this approach in terms of culture and estates and that feeling of, you know, staff being valued across the organisation? Why is it important?
For me, there's kind of two sides to that coin. You know, we do work with service users who we know from there about our prevalence studies around how much adversity, and when we compare the offending population against the general population, there are higher stats there of individuals who have experienced trauma. And it also is about us not just thinking about one population, but our understanding that trauma isn't isolated to one population. This can affect anyone. When we come into work, we're coming with our own experiences, and it's really difficult just to walk into our place of work and leave all our life experiences at the door. Maybe it's impossible to do that, and that's why it is so relevant for all of us, for us in terms of how we deliver our service, but also how we relate to each other, and showing that compassion and understanding that we might not know what others have experienced when we're working with each other. And that's why, as I say, it is so relevant for the workplace. And it's important for us to really try to start to think about what those principles of being in trauma-informed are, and really not looking at them as a checklist or something that we need to do as an additional to our workload. It will take time, and that does take effort to consciously do. But this is something that we just want to automatically think about any aspect of our work, whether you're front facing or you're making those decisions that impact others in the organisation, or if you're just having an interaction with a colleague. You know, these are all things that are so relevant for us to be thinking about.
So with that in mind, Marian, Probation is an organisation that has frontline social workers and others working on a face-to-face basis with service users, but also a range of staff in other areas like IT and communications and HR. Is that approach just for frontline staff and practitioners, or is it something that needs to be embedded right throughout the organisation and is relevant to every role?
Yeah, no, it's certainly relevant to every role, Gail. And I think that, again, is another misconception, isn't it? That people think this is just frontline staff, or people, you know, even when they hear the word trauma, they think, oh, it's counsellors, it's therapists, but it's for everybody. So as we know, and as we said, if in terms of our own unique history, you know, people being impacted by it, that can be anybody that works in this organisation, whether it's somebody that's greeting you at the front door or your CEO, you know, and having to think about how they're showing up every day with what they carry. You know, everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own journey. And as I said, we have our own story and journey having grown up here. People who come to live here maybe have sought refuge here, are coming with their own stories. So it's for everybody. And in terms of the workplace, you know, when we think about the policymakers and when we think of the people that are making decisions about money, when we think about all of that, for them to have an understanding of what's important and why they need to filter some of these principles into the policies, into the procedures, into the protocols, why it's important to review things, evaluate things, how to engage with people. And that idea that words matter, it's Karen Treisman, I think, says that, you know, every intervention can be, or every interaction can be an intervention. You don't have to be a therapist. That's not just the people that, for yourselves, that are maybe dealing with the people who are working with you that are on probation, but it's for everybody in your organisation. You know, for people to understand that and also there's recognition. You know, I think to recognise the roles that other people play. I think sometimes when, you know, people think, oh, it's only for them, and they maybe feel, well, they're not thinking about how this impacts me, or they're not thinking about when I type up this report or I read the details that are in this of somebody's history and trouble and abuse or whatever, how that's impacted me. You know, so it's most definitely for everybody.
And at that policy level that you talked about, we're, as an organisation, looking at our strategic vision for the next 3 years. And Safeguarding Board have been really helpful in terms of helping probation look at the corporate plan, for example, through a trauma lens. We're going forward into a new corporate planning period. What should we be looking at in terms of trauma and at that corporate strategic level? Have you advice for the organisation to look at things in that trauma lens?
Your best starting point is always the 6 principles. And I think if you look at how they show up You know, if we're thinking about safety and trustworthiness and empowerment and inclusion and collaboration, even the use of those words in your corporate plan, but also then thinking in terms of the actions. Well, what are we actually going to do, and how will we notice it? And what will other people notice? How will they notice safety? How will they notice inclusion? How will they notice collaboration? You know, how do we demonstrate that in a very real and authentic way? And if you look to see that the principles are infused throughout that, but also then are very clear about how you're going to evidence it and demonstrate it, then I think it's a good starting point.
Kirsten, we've set up the trauma group within the organisation. How important has that been in terms of just providing a bit of a strategic driver as well to you and to others in this world?
Really, really important. So that's our trauma and resilience implementation group. And it really has been so critical in terms of us, one, even thinking about our trauma-informed organ assessments, about where we really are in terms of that journey of becoming trauma-informed and what we need to do to work towards more progress towards that goal, and pulling together an implementation plan and making that really practical in terms of how we can start to think about being trauma informed at every level of the organisation.
And you've taken on the post in terms of that coordination piece. Why did you want to do that, and what brought you into that area of work?
Trauma and trauma informed approaches has always been something I've been interested in. I just really believe in its messaging. I believe in the importance and the difference that this can make, not just for our organisation, but when we're thinking about our partner agencies and actually Northern Ireland as a whole, working together towards this vision. And that's when we think about being trauma-informed. It's a systems-wide approach, just as it is organisational-wide as well. It's that key message of trying to understand that shift from looking at what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. We're always trying as part of probation to understand how someone has come to be where they are, what's maybe led or contributed towards their offending. When we look at trauma through that lens with our increased understanding of trauma, that it really helps us to look at a person and understand their life experiences rather than just looking at a behaviour and seeing that as problematic. We're trying to unpick that a bit. And that doesn't just apply to service users, that does apply across the board when we're interacting with each other. The other part of what drove me towards this role in terms of implementing trauma-informed approaches is just that recognition of how this can really support us just to be in a better place of work. And ultimately, you know, we can label trauma-informed in what terms make sense for us. For me, there does run the risk sometimes of, you know, feeling a bit fatigued with that word. I mean, I'm already mindful of how many times I've mentioned that word. But it's about us looking at what's the core essence of that. And for me, it's us coming into work, feeling supported, feeling valued, respected, and to be a part of that work feels really rewarding for me.
And Marian, probation is ultimately a service delivered by people for people. We are very relationship based, and we talk about having relationship based practice and trying to deliver that very individualized approach. So again, for you've had your own journey working operationally and then coming into Safeguarding Board. What brought you into Safeguarding Board, and how does Safeguarding Board provide that support to organisations like us?
Well, I suppose my own journey probably started with my mother, I would say, who was full of compassion and of giving people the benefit of the doubt and always trying to look beyond what you would see. Very much so. So I think that was ingrained in me from I was quite young. I'm a speech and language therapist by profession, and a big part of that was spent in Sure Start, 15 years actually. So again, working in the area where you notice the impact of social inequalities, social injustice, and how that can impact people. And I suppose there's that idea of, you know, when we think about trauma and people think of it as a one-off event, you know, and maybe an accident or abuse or a catastrophic event, you know, but it can be cumulative as well for people, you know, people, whether it's poverty or not feeling seen, not feeling safe. So I suppose it started there. And then I did some, training around trauma-informed approaches when I was in Sure Start. And then I also work as a registered intermediary for the Department of Justice in a private capacity. So that's assessing the communication skills of vulnerable witnesses and victims and defendants for giving evidence. So that I started to see how trauma can really impact people. And then I also, as a speech and language therapist, moved into working with people in justice settings. So when you're dealing with people like you do yourselves, who, I remember somebody once saying to me, you're dealing with the people in society who need the most love, but ask for it in the most unconventional ways. You start to really try and see the people, and as you say, not the behaviour, not the actions. And it's not about excusing it. It's not about excusing it at all. It's about trying to understand it, because if you seek to understand it, then you have a better chance of changing it. And for yourselves as well, that's very much it. So when the opportunity came up, I suppose, to do this secondment with the Safeguarding Board and the Trauma-Informed Practice team, I jumped at it. I was ready for a change, and I thought, this is the natural next step for me, because everything in my career I feel has been bringing me to this. And to work in an organisation that has the privilege of working with so many other organisations that are doing brilliant work, and to be able to support people, to signpost them, to provide them with tools, point them in research, coordinate things, bring people together. I think the thing that I like most about it is, again, that idea of connectedness and relationship building between organisations, that cross-sector bit, where you can really get to see where organisations can support each other. And sometimes we can be central to that in terms of bringing people together. So I feel that's a real privilege in my role in the team that I work in.
Yeah. And Kirsten, when Marian's talked there about understanding behaviour, not excusing it, I mean, that's absolutely, I suppose, sometimes a misconception about our work, that we're excusing or supporting offenders, when what we're trying to do is challenge behaviours and understand it in order to move them away from criminality. Are there other misconceptions out there that are myths around the trauma-informed approach that you think are important to try and burst around, what the work looks like and what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think that is a really big one, and I think Marian summed that up really well in terms of us understanding that behaviour and understanding it so we can seek to address it and support people and reduce more harm being done to others. Yeah. There can be some myths as well around maybe how we apply it within our own workforce. So, a common thing I would hear is about, one, maybe this being an add-on to work, but also about this being, is this going to stand in our way of having difficult conversations? Are people going to use, well, I didn't feel that wasn't trauma-informed for me, and start to maybe use that as a way that makes us fearful of having those conversations? And that's not what we're saying when we're trying to apply trauma-informed approaches and think about these principles. In fact, what we're trying to do here is still have those conversations, doing that in a way that is safe, that takes on that recognition that a person might have had a similar experience and been really affected about it in the past. So I think it's about us trying to just do more harm to a person, rather than us saying that we have to sugarcoat decisions or that we can't challenge because of this. It's not that. It's about how and the way we're saying things.
And as an organisation that's committed to continual learning and enhancing our practice, this can make practice better effectively.
More and more research coming out to show us what the tangible benefits of adopting trauma-informed approaches are and can be for an organisation. We can see those positives in terms of actually increasing the effectiveness of the service that we deliver, but also to increase staff wellbeing, to look at how we actually increase our retention of staff, decrease staff sickness. But also when we're thinking about how we engage with service users too, this is about us looking at not just at the behaviour, but really understanding what's happening beneath that. And that can really help work to build more positive working relationships. And it can also help to make our work more effective, because we understand more what's going on for that person, to help get them to access the right support that they need.
And Marian, if you had advice for a staff member who's sitting out in our team in North Belfast or in Mid Ulster today, and they want to really buy into this and implement this trauma-informed approach in their practice, what advice would you have for them?
Well, first of all, I would say that a lot of people are already doing a lot of good stuff and a lot of people are trauma-informed by nature in terms of the way they engage and interact. It's not the add-on, but it's sometimes just about being intentional with it and recognising that what it is. So there's that to start off with, you know. But also, I suppose there are lots of good resources out there. You know, we have our own trauma-informed organisational toolkit, and it looks at 10 focus areas, you know, from leadership to workforce well-being to lived experience and involvement. There are 10 different focus areas, but if you wanted to have a bit of a dive into it, you could read that, and it would help you as well, maybe have an understanding of what it means for organisations, and realising that it is across the board as well, you know. But I think as well, it's just being mindful of yourself and how you show up, and being mindful of taking care of yourself, being mindful of your organisation's responsibility to take care of you. And then just, for me, a trauma-informed approach is good human practice. It's about humanity. It's about being good humans. And if we can show up and keep that in our minds, that, you know, I'm going to be a good human today, and think about that in anything that we do, whether it's, as I say, in the finance department, whether you're sitting at the front desk greeting people, whether or not you're in the communications department, keeping that in mind and thinking about that. How would I like to be treated? And then thinking it's about everybody doing their bit, everybody doing it a bit better, and everybody doing it together. One of the things I say to people is call it out, you know, but name it. Just say, I felt really safe when you took me into that room to have that conversation, or I felt really included when you recognised that wasn't going to be easy for me. Or in terms of I'm thinking about the labels of the six principles, you know, whenever you did that, you really empowered that person, so that you're calling it out, you're naming it, you're using the language of the trauma-informed approach, but you're also recognising it. There's an American author, Bell Hooks. First of all, she talks about healing is an act of communion, so we do it together. But the other thing she talks about is about different aspects of love, but one of the aspects of love is recognition. People need to feel seen. And I think if we are doing that ourselves and we're demonstrating that and we're modelling it, that's really powerful, because that will start to seep out, and it'll be infectious, you know, and that'll be really good.
You've mentioned lots of resources that are out there, Marian, on the Safeguarding Board website. And I think we have some resources as well on the website and intranet, Kirsten.
Yeah, on our intranet page. We have a landing page for trauma-informed approaches. And that's really to have that kind of shared understanding about what we're hoping to achieve, but also what that really means, along with some of the definitions of what the key principles are, as well as resources to help staff start to think about, well, how does this actually apply to my role? So maybe some kind of key questions to think about. How would I apply the principle of safety in my practice? What might that look like if I am not a front-facing or if I am front-facing staff? So it's just to get staff start to think about, well, how could this work for me, and what might work best?
And if any of the teams that are out there want to know more about this, or maybe want somebody to attend a team meeting, there is a resource there. Just provide a bit more information if that's needed.
100%. And that this is an ongoing conversation that's going to happen. It's going to take years. You know, we always talk about becoming trauma-informed as a journey, and it really is that.
If anybody is listening to this today and they maybe feel a little unsafe, are a little concerned, and some of the work that we are all dealing with is difficult work and complex work, there are resources there as well for people who are maybe feeling that they need a little bit more personal support through line management and HR and other initiatives that we have.
Absolutely. And I mean, we were having that conversation before, Marian, about how easy it can be for us to overlook the impact of our work. And again, that doesn't just apply to frontline staff. Of course, that means that too. But it also applies to working in a really fast-paced environment, working with really complex service users and needs, you know, of different people. But also just the high demand of our job, things we might be reading, conversations we might be having.
And maybe just finally, Marian, are you optimistic and hopeful for the future of delivering trauma-informed approaches in organisations like Probation?
Yes, I am. I am hopeful. You know, I think, well, first of all, the Programme for Government has, you know, committed to having a trauma-informed public sector. And so that in itself is a massive thing, you know, in terms of looking at going forward and where it moves. And we don't know what our team will look like in the next couple of years, but we're definitely very hopeful, given that commitment from the executive, that there is an understanding of the importance of it,
Yeah.
and therefore there will be things in place to support organisations and that. I mean, obviously we're always looking at organisations also, this sustainability of it,
Okay.
you know, and how organisations can take that on board themselves and infuse it and all of that. But I'm certainly very hopeful, and I think there is a real energy about it. You know, and we've talked about that idea of it, you know, being tokenistic or a buzzword or whatever. But at the minute, no, I think people are genuine in their interest in wanting to do this, and that idea of being intentional with it. There are real opportunities for organisations to work together, to learn from each other. There are lots of opportunities for cross-sector learning and support, and we know in a time of where resources are tight, you know, I think there are real opportunities for people to come together, you know, and support each other. And we're certainly looking at the development of, well, first of all, one of the things we're looking at the development of a trauma-informed leadership programme at the minute, and we're also looking at the development of a peer support network. And, you know, we will get that established then with a view to, again, organisations being able to run with that nearly and support each other themselves as well, and keep that going, because people are telling us that that's what they need, that's what they want. People who are further down the journey can support people who are at the beginning. I am hopeful and I believe in people.
That's a brilliant way to end, and that has been a really interesting conversation. There's lots to unpack from that, and this is a conversation that we're going to sustain and keep happening over the next 12 months. And if people do want more information, there's information on PBNI's intranet pages, on the website, and on the Safeguarding Board. So Marian and Kirsten, I want to thank you both very much for the conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
And we'll continue on this journey
Sounds great.
towards a trauma-informed approach in probation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.